War is bad. But if war bad, then why do we do that? Well, there's plenty of reasons. Too many taxes, archduke deaths, and of course, invasions. When tens of thousands must die so a map looks like this instead of this. But sometimes, through what we call shenanigans, it doesn't lead to war. Case in point, the invasion of Crimea. That time, Russia invaded land larger than some countries and didn't start an all-out war somehow. Of course, years later it would lead to war, but we're not talking about that today. What happened? How'd they do it? Could you do the same if you set your mind to it? Well, maybe, but let's start at the start of the end of the Soviet Union. It's the 1990s. Everyone smells like teen spirit. People let this hellspawn into their homes, and Ukraine and Russia are now their own separate countries. Since Russia gave Ukraine control of Crimea in the commie days, they still own it. Problem is, there's a lot of Russians there and a few very valuable ports. You see, when the two nations filed for divorce, it wasn't so clean.
Every day I wake up and I hope you're dead.
Like, who gets all these nukes in Ukraine? Who controls the old Soviet Navy in the Black Sea? Well, eventually Ukraine would destroy all their nukes and split the Navy, and Russia agreed to respect the sovereignty of Ukraine, and the issue of borders never ever came up ever again until it did. Because between the nukes and the battleships, apparently they forgot to decide who owns this tiny little sandbar on the border. But I'm sure that won't be enough to almost start a war. Though it got resolved, tensions between the two countries continue to rise. Now, when you think of Russians, you may think of Adidas, owning bears as pets, having the highest rate of alcoholism in the world, and of course, their ports. My God, do Russians love their ports. They fought multiple wars to prove it. And Russia was eyeing up Sevastopol, the biggest port in Crimea, like a Minecraft YouTuber eyeing up a child. As early as 2009, pro-Russian protests were being held on the peninsula by ethnic Russians who believed they should be part of the motherland. Russia had been on a kick lately of invading its neighbors to help breakaway states, and it was starting to seem like they just might again. It's 2013. Margaret Thatcher is finally dead, which has nothing to do with the story, but it bears remembering. Anyways, things came to a head later that year when Ukrainian President Viktor Yanukovych gave a big middle finger to the EU and got real buddy-buddy with old Vladdy Putin, triggering the Euromaidan protests. The Ukrainian people wanted closer connections to the rest of Europe and weren't appreciative of Russia licking its lips at the sweet borscht that was their country. Not to mention, they were kinda sick of how corrupt their government had become. In fact, Transparency International named Yanukovych the world's top example of corruption, right behind your friend who always plays banker in Monopoly but swears he isn't stealing, but there's no way that he could have bought Marvin Gardens unless he was stealing. So the people rose up. Protests erupted all over the country, with massive ones in the capital Kiev where they made this big camp. Eventually, these turned into the largest pro-European rallies ever, in an extreme oversimplification of one of the most important events in this nation's history. The authoritarian corrupt government did what all authoritarian corrupt governments do when they see protesters. And that made the situation better for the protesters, because instead of protest, now it turned into a full-scale revolution. Oopsie. Meanwhile, many in Crimea weren't fans of this whole removal of corrupt politicians nonsense and started to grow closer with Russia. In February of 2014, the chairman of the Supreme Council of Crimea, which is the coolest thing they could have called that, went to Moscow and declared the transfer of Crimea to Ukraine was, in legal terms, an oopsie. Back in Ukraine, on the 22nd, Yanukovych declared a national day of mourning for all the lives lost during the protests that definitely weren't his fault. Mr. President, your daily 12 bottles of vodka have arrived. Where's the president? He fled the capital. Guess we all grieve in different ways. We have to convene parliament to vote for a new president. Whoa, hold on, man. He could just be out to lunch or something. Yeah, man, I'm sure he probably just went for a walk out there. No, we need to remove him. Is that even constitutional? I don't know, but what's he gonna do? Call us corrupt? You got me there. Finally, a new government was voted in. The Maidan Revolution had been a success. Russia, seeing their son get mollywopped on the playground by all the nerds he used to bully, declared the new government illegitimate. And Crimea, totally losing its shit at this point. Mobs and militias on both sides began to form, and Russian propaganda came flooding in. Pro-Russian protests throughout the peninsula weakened city and local governments. They demanded a vote on separation, while pro-Ukrainian protesters fought back. Things got so bad that in Sevastopol, the leader of the city took a big swig of fuck it all and resigned. And the city council just elected this random Russian businessman to be the new mayor.
Alexei, you're the mayor now.
Oh my gosh!
The situation was bad for both the regional and the national government, and it was about to get worse. On February 27th, oh yeah, this is all happening in the span of a week, by the way, government buildings in Crimea are suddenly taken over and checkpoints set up by mysterious armed men wearing Russian army uniforms, using Russian weapons, speaking Russian, and serving Russia's interests. But their uniforms are unmarked, so who knows who these guys could be really. Definitely not Russian military, says Russia. On March 1st, the new prime minister of Crimea took control of military and police in the region and asked Russia for help. They, of course, eagerly agreed. Putin announced that he had no plans to annex Crimea, so everyone realized that Putin had plans to annex Crimea. More and more of these little green men kept showing up and had basically taken over everything at this point. But trust me, guys, these aren't Russian soldiers. Not that it mattered. Now you may be thinking, why isn't Ukraine doing anything about this? Well, you know how countries have ministers of defense and their entire job is to prevent this exact thing from happening? Well, turns out he was Russian and he defected as soon as this started, along with the commander of the Navy. So they got two new guys, but the new commander of the Navy defected literally the day after he was appointed. As for the defense minister, it basically went like this. Okay, Ihor, Russia's surrounding all our troops. We need to pull them back. I don't really feel like it. What? I don't want to. They're all defecting now. Ugh, fine. You come back. And you come back. And you come back. Why are you doing it so slowly? Hey, if you don't like the way I do my job, then fire me. Okay, you're fired. Really? Many soldiers either fled or, like their former minister, defected, and the whole peninsula was taken without a single battle. The Supreme Council of Crimea, basically at gunpoint now, held a referendum in March on whether they should join Russia or not, and wouldn't you know it, 95% of people voted in favor. Damn, I love democracy. On March 17th, Crimea declared its independence, and 4 days later officially joined the Russian Federation. Now, obviously, this was all very illegal. You can't just waltz into some land and take it because some people there like you. I mean, most people in Vermont are basically Canadians, but I dare those maple-licking motherfuckers to try to take it. The world was pretty upset about this, especially the US and UK, who made that agreement with Russia from the beginning of the video that said that they wouldn't, you know, do this exact thing. So the US said, now hold on, you can't just walk into someone else's country and take their strategically valuable naval land because a small group of your people want you to and you know they can't fight back. In the modern era, of course, sanctions were quickly put onto Putin and his allies. Any cooperation between NATO and Moscow ceased, and Russia was kicked out of the G8, which is basically just the cool countries club. But really, there was nothing anyone could do. Russia had complete control of the peninsula. They later admitted that they did actually have a little bit to do with the annexation of Crimea, which just blew everyone's minds. I mean, real shocker that. Feeling emboldened, a few other Russian-heavy regions tried to break away from Ukraine, starting a drawn-out trench war in the east that would later lead to direct confrontation between the two nations. Russia's annexation of Crimea was one of the most bold moves that the nation has taken in its history, and they've had a lot of bold moves. But in truth, there were many real people in Crimea who wanted to join Russia and were happy about the invasion. So, it's fair to assume that Russia probably thought the rest of Ukraine would be the same way, and boy howdy, were they wrong.